Christmas has come early for Democrats and a growing group of Republicans who are warning every day that Donald Trump's second term is off the rails and dangerous. That gift comes in the form of a rare on-the-record recitation of Donald Trump's manifest lack of suitability or fitness for the office he holds. Quote, an alcoholic's personality. That's how Donald Trump's current chief of staff, the effective CEO of Donald Trump's White House, describes Donald Trump right now. That's her view right now to journalist and author Chris Whipple. It comes out in 11 on-the-record interviews she did with Whipple for Vanity Fair. Susie Wiles tells Whipple this, quote, some clinical psychologist that knows 1 million times more than I do will dispute what I'm going to say, but high-functioning alcoholics or alcoholics in general, their personalities are exaggerated when they drink. And so I'm a little bit of an expert in big personalities, Wiles said. Trump has, quote, an alcoholic's personality. He, quote, operates with the view that there's nothing he can't do, nothing, zero, nothing, end quote. Susie Wiles doesn't hold back when it comes to other members of Trump's inner circle, people like J.D. Vance, who she describes like this, quote, he's been a conspiracy theorist for a decade, end quote. As for how J.D. Vance traveled from the belief that he said publicly that Trump might be, quote, America's Hitler or, quote, a cynical a-hole like Nixon, not to mention an idiot, to now serving as his vice president, Susie Wiles offers this explanation, quote, his conversion came when he was running for the Senate. And I think his conversion was a little bit more sort of political, end quote. As for Russ Vought, he's the architect of Project 2025 and the director of the Office of Management and Budget. According to Susie Wiles, again, in an on-the-record series of interviews, he's a, quote, right-wing absolute zealot, end quote. Regarding Elon Musk, who took a chainsaw to the federal government, traumatized the federal workforce, Susie Wiles says this, quote, he's an avowed ketamine user and he sleeps in a sleeping bag in the OEOB in the daytime. And he's an odd duck, as I think geniuses are. You know, it's not helpful, but he is his own person, end quote. The journalist, Chris Whipple, adding this, quote, when I asked her, Susie Wiles, what she thought of Elon Musk reposting a tweet about public sector workers killing millions under Hitler, Stalin, and Mao, she replied, quote, I think that's when he's microdosing, end quote. It's safe to say nothing about this is normal. Nothing about this is reassuring. That Susie Wiles, the chief of staff, has a harsher view of Donald Trump than, frankly, anything people from the outside of that West Wing say and see. The White House chief of staff describing the president of the United States, the commander-in-chief, the person atop the nuclear command structure, as someone with an alcoholic's personality, that the vice president is simply there for politics, that he's an unprincipled conspiracy theorist and has been for a decade. That is not normal. And what it shows is that, in a lot of ways, the second Trump administration is similar to the one that came before, but very, very different. Here's how one of Trump's first chiefs of staff, former General John Kelly, described his approach to Donald Trump.
When I was in the White House, for that matter, DHS, I was, originally the conversation would be, Mr. President, that's outside your authority, or, that's a routine use. You really don't want to do that inside the United States. When he would tell me that he wanted to do something, 100% of the time I check with the White House counsel, because oftentimes he wouldn't have the authority to do what he wanted to do.
That was then, though. Now in a second term, Susie Wiles, his chief of staff, is his chief enabler. Vance telling Vanity Fair this, quote, her job is to actually facilitate Trump's vision and to make his vision come to life, end quote. But at specific moments, far from facilitating the agenda, Wiles actually is blowing Trump's cover. Here's what she says about Trump's campaign to prosecute his political enemies from that Vanity Fair series of interviews. Quote, back in March, I'd asked Wiles, quote, do you ever go to Trump and say, look, this is not supposed to be a retribution tour? Yes, I do, Susie Wiles replied. We have a loose agreement that the score settling will end before the first 90 days are over. In late August, I asked Susie Wiles, quote, remember when you said to me months ago that Trump promised to end the revenge and retribution tour after 90 days? Quote, I don't think he's on a retribution tour, she said. A governing principle for him is, I don't want what happened to me to happen to anybody else. And so people that have done bad things need to get out of government. In some cases, it may look like retribution, and there may be an element of that from time to time. Who would blame him? Not me. But regarding the Tish James case, Susie Wiles admits this, quote, well, that might be the one retribution. And on the Comey case, Susie Wiles says, quote, I mean, people could think it does look vindictive. I can't tell you why you should not think that. Susie Wiles said of Trump, quote, I don't think he wakes up thinking about retribution, but when there's an opportunity, he will go for it, end quote. In a statement, the White House stood by Susie Wiles today. She released her own statement on X, saying that the article was a, quote, hit piece and that it was missing context. Okay, they're literally all her quotes. Joining us now, former DHS Chief of Staff during Trump's first term, Miles Taylor's here. Also joining us, managing editor of The Bulwark, contributor Sam Stein joins us. Andrew's still here. Miles, I'm dying to know what you think.
Well, a couple of things. I mean, Nicole, when I first read this, my immediate reaction was, okay, Susie Wiles is admitting what we have long known about Donald Trump, that the guy wears his heartlessness on his sleeve. But as you noted, she also blew his cover that he wears lawlessness as a badge of honor. I mean, she just gave that up completely and in ways that can materially affect some of the cases that they have against Trump's enemies. I mean, she said the quiet part out loud, that these prosecutions are basically vindictive. And I think she'll give people like Letitia James and others some of the legal support they need to make a direct connection between the president's official abuses of power and the actions being taken against them. So that's piece number one. But piece number two, Nicole, I really felt like comparing her to my former boss, John Kelly, she seems a lot more like a bystander in the Oval Office, a lot more like a bystander. She comes off in these interviews like a nice-ish retired lady who says, yeah, Mr. President, that might be bad, but doesn't really do anything to stop it. In fact, says avowedly that her agenda, even if she doesn't agree with it, is to go make the things happen, seemingly implying that the lawlessness is something she puts up with. And then she went even further. That quote you said earlier, Nicole, that Donald Trump has a view, in her words, that there's nothing he cannot do, nothing, zero. That's just a full admission that this man doesn't believe he can be stopped by anything, not by the law, not by the Constitution, and her job is to make that happen. That's scary as hell. And John Kelly's view was diametrically opposite of Susie Wiles' view. His view was, no, I cannot and should not tell the president he can do illegal things, and I should help him create off-ramps from doing illegal things and to comply with his duties under the U.S. Constitution.
Miles, you know how I feel, and some of our original or earliest conversations had some of this tension in it, that anyone that was a part of it deserves to be held accountable for their role in Trump 1.0 because it was its own basket of horrible things for a lot of people. But I appreciate the distinction you're making, and I want to go deeper with you on that. General John Kelly was loyal to the Constitution. Don McGahn seemed to have a spidey sense for that which was legal. In the January 6th Select Committee's congressional hearings, Labor Secretary Scalia seemed to come out and have some sense that the Constitution should be an element in considerations about how to exit Washington after losing in 2020. Bill Barr draws the line and calls Trump's conspiracy theories about losing BS. Susie Wiles isn't wrestling with anything. She acknowledges working for someone with an alcoholic's personality, which seems to fail just a very obvious fitness test for the person who sits atop the military chain of command. And you know, you talked about the 25th Amendment being discussed in your op-ed and in the book Anonymous. I mean, she seems like a witness for Trump's lack of fitness, doesn't she?
And maybe even more than, sort of a passive witness. I mean, there seems to be almost admissions of guilt here, or perhaps direct admissions of guilt, that the president is engaged in abusing his power for political purposes. I mean, this was the exact thing when you and I talked in the early days, Nicole, that I had come forward to talk about. As my worry was, hey, if this guy wins a second term, he is talking about doing all of these things that would be clear abuses of his powers as president to go advance himself politically and to get retribution against his enemies. That's wrong. It's unconstitutional. It's un-American. And she seems to be conceding that that's what this presidency is all about. And I'll also agree with you, Nicole, that, look, in the first Trump administration, myself included, there were no heroes. There were only survivors. But there were two kinds of survivors: people who survived to protect the skin on their own necks, and people who survived to protect the United States Constitution. And you don't have to love them, but we now see very, very clearly and in very stark relief what happens when the only people you have left in government are the ones that want to protect the skin on their own backs. And what you see is the Constitution gets torched. So as bad as the first Trump administration was, and believe me, it was a pride-swallowing siege every single day inside that thing, this is what people wanted to prevent from happening. The lawlessness, the complete lawlessness from top to bottom that we are seeing now in just 11 months of this administration.
Ebro Darden is known to many for doing exactly that with his voice and his radio show with Laura Stiles and Peter Rosenberg in New York, and through their interviews with politicians. He has spoken as an advocate for working people and forgotten neighborhoods, challenged right-wing extremism, and also problems he saw with D.C. Democrats. And I mention this now because there's news on this tonight. But for context, consider that in the year after the January 6th insurrection, when some were saying, let's just move on, or that was just an aberration and not who we are as Americans, I want to show you Ebro's corrective declaration.
American exceptionalism. We're the best. We're the greatest. Even right now, people who saw January 6th will fix their lips and say, this is not who we are. What are you talking about? We just saw it on television. It's clearly who we are. What are you saying? Donald Trump wins presidency. This is not who we are. Did you go to the rallies? Did you see what was happening on TV? It's clearly a part of who we are. Police kill black men in the streets. This is not who we are. It's been who we are since inception, since day one. Why do we keep acting like we're not this? Because we're programmed to think that we're better than we actually are. And we're going to have to come to terms with that if we're actually going to improve. And until we do, there won't be improvement. There's people who don't want to convict Donald Trump or any of his cronies because of the way it looks to the world. You know, we're not a banana republic. We don't, jail our former politicians. We don't do that here. Well, we might want to start. We might want to start and fast. Otherwise, we'll just have more of this.
This is who we are. Some truths are hard, and they're not always well received. Ebro and his co-hosts knew that when they spoke out on their radio show, Ebro in the Morning. They've referenced that.
This dialogue right here that we're having on a public radio station
doesn't happen on
8 o'clock in the morning in the biggest media market. No one's touching this. They are deathly afraid of touching this conversation.
The news is that parent company, Mediaco, has abruptly canceled the entire show, Ebro in the Morning. The move was abrupt. There's no public plan for a new morning show yet. And Ebro publicly saying they were facing corporate pressure over their free speech. That major media outlets are folding up because they're trying to renew deals and licenses. And he said they need my blank talking, anti-Netanyahu, anti-government progressive blank out of the way. He speaks candidly, as you see. He said talking about politics on a corporate-run media entity is always risky. Fact check, true a lot of the time. Now, that company, Mediaco, did not respond to requests for comment, which is a contrast, by the way, to the Ellison's Paramount. When they were asked about the Colbert cancellation, they denied motives of censorship. This company isn't saying, they're not publicly denying what Ebro says about that pressure and the Cuomo interview, etc. so far. This cancellation is news tonight because this is a loss for independent media and local media and diverse voices. And it fits these two interlocking corporate trends in our current MAGA era. Government censorship over here, and then billionaires also controlling more media while they consolidate it over here. And that has obvious, basically sometimes unavoidable impact. It limits the reach of the very free speech that the Constitution is supposed to protect. This is bigger than right now or whether you agree with everything somebody said. It's their right to say it and have a free press. And in capitalism, the free press runs through these companies. We are witnessing the limiting of the number of people who can press the politicians for voters' benefit. And remember, it ain't supposed to just be TV hosts, let alone government-approved, billionaire-owned stations. And the hosts were out there, independent on politics and culture. Ebro also famously was an early critic of what he saw as Kanye West's emerging hate. He also confronted other artists about alleged battery against women. At a time where in the culture things can be just promotion, this was a place where people were really tested and debated. The other hosts, Laura Stiles and Peter Rosenberg, mixed culture with using that same platform to talk politics and civic life and have some hard conversations.
I said, Kanye, the conversation's been open, bro. You're just not a part of it. And you're just chiming in right now because you got an album coming out. Are you having those conversations in your house about Black Lives Matter? You're talking about things you don't understand. And you're playing with things that people have died for. I keep saying I'm buying a Colin Kaepernick jersey.
Because at least you can support him in that way.
Because that's the only way I can support him.
Congratulations, you played yourself.
Because your dumbass, Kanye, and others like you have a tough time articulating your thoughts. And you need to shut up and sort to people who articulate thoughts well. There are people who study this, talk about this, have legislation on. I mean, there's people who've spent their lifetime writing novels, books, research on this. But instead, y'all dummies jump up and use your platform to say nonsensical BS. Black women having the highest mortality rate during birth because doctors don't listen to black women.
The market isn't about helping the middle class.
Rosenberg, we're not going to debate people. The market, most people are in the market aren't in the middle class. But thanks for your call, Kate.
Why aren't we going to debate people?
I don't think I've ever minced my words about my feelings about Netanyahu on this program.
The immigrants that come here, that sacrifice so much, our parents, our friends, our loved ones, the people that serve us every day, you know, that deliver our food, that fix our cars. How much we do appreciate them.
We take sexual assault here serious, and we can't, get into details.
Change the subject. I'm finna walk out.
We don't have to talk about nothing else. We could be done right here.
All right, I'm going. Say less.
I get emotional when I start thinking about what the black church means to us. The spiritual component of black people is the unbreakable point.
That's just some of what made this show significant to a lot of people, and having a place to do that and broadcast it. And I just showed you the politics, which the hosts say they were censored for. Ebro in the Morning was also a huge hub known nationally for artists and culture. And tonight, as this show ends after 13 years, we pay tribute to that.
Sometimes it's just words just come to me. I don't know where it's coming from.
You just put all of the heat on the album.
It's just like the beat, like bang, 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 bang.
I'm willing to work with anybody, man. That has talent.
You expect me as a human being to not want to defend myself because I'm rich?
I'm Dora the Explorer. Like Bob, backpack, shorts, T-shirt.
It's more about the positivity side, man, than the upliftment of, having a beautiful black family.
People, they have time to heal, and they learn to live and they learn to love. We could talk slick all day as rappers. That's easy to do. That's like taking the easy way out. But what are you saying, though?
People get mad when it affects them. They get involved when it affects them.
And there's more people hurting than eating in this world than anything.
Who has done it better than me? Nobody. I back up any talk. I'm relaxing.
You slow jam.
I'm slow jamming all day.
This radio show is ending, a loss for many listeners. Public reaction could still matter. we know the outcry against the attempted Kimmel cancellation was enough to ultimately reverse it. They even sparked more interest and ratings in his free speech in the days after they beat Trump. But let's face it here, and yes, I'm speaking to you through the TV, but not everyone has national TV visibility, or let alone Kimmel-sized fame or Kimmel's audience, which is a point he graciously made during that whole kerfuffle, advocating for others' free speech and telling people to pay attention the next time they come for you. And that's why it's easier, perhaps, to target voices who are less famous, who have fewer powerful allies, including in business, or who, as I'm telling you tonight, come from independent and diverse media. Now, these radio hosts are going to keep working on their show in the digital space. They've launched it on YouTube. You can Google it now if you want. It's the Ebro Laura Rosenberg Show. So the YouTube handle is Ebro Laura Rosenberg. At a time when some podcasts and online shows do reach more people than radio and TV, maybe these incidents and the effort to censor people will lead to other open, long-form digital shows and audiences connected. These hosts I'm telling you about, and their radio rivals in New York, The Breakfast Club, really have helped pioneer a format that is now replicated in so many podcasts, tackling a broad set of topics from culture to politics, not just staying in one lane because of some assignment. It's a style that, when it works, can be like casual with depth. And in Ebro's case, it's an approach to accountability that left him with some critics and detractors on the right, and then on the left, and in the mainstream, and even in core hip-hop. And that's okay, by the way. Being independent in politics, culture, or anything often means being willing to repeatedly upset people who are sticking to certain teams or ways or partisanship. And so I'm telling you about this, if you know this show, why it matters. If you're learning about it now, it's in the wider context of those problems I mentioned: MAGA big government censorship and corporate media consolidation. We'll keep bringing you those stories here as we value our independence and you supporting independent media. Tonight, we mark the end of a show that was about all those things: independence and truth, as they put it, hard conversations, or what is sometimes called doing it for the culture. As for what that means or requires, well, I'll give the hosts the last word on that tonight.
Originally, it was not doing it because you wanted to be famous or doing it for money, but I do this for
the art.
Forwarding the art of hip-hop. Hip-hop has always been an extension of the voice of not only the Black nationalist movement, but also the community of the greater community of street culture, right? Whether you were Black or Jewish or Puerto Rican in New York City, this was youth culture creating new things out of things that already existed, right? That sampling and records and chopping records. So you were creating something new out of something that was already there.
Joining us now is Democratic National Committee Chair Ken Martin to weigh in on this.
Welcome, Chairman. The Congress was not wrong. The Speaker does have it within his power and capacity to put together with the Republican caucus a bill that would correspond to dealing with some of the issues related to Obamacare. The Democrats have been very, very successful at leveling this up as both, and this is important in my view, both a national issue and a local issue. Tying those two pieces together so that each community can have a conversation about the impact of the decision of this White House and this Congress, this Republican Congress, on their health care and premiums, but then connect that from the small towns that they live in to the big cities, to the suburbs, to the exurbs, et cetera. Right. Talk a little bit about that strategy and how you think it's going. And what do you see as we turn the corner into the new year once we hit that plateau where everyone this Christmas get that special envelope from Santa that says you now is paying 1,000% more in your premiums?
Let me just say, I mean, look, it's we've been dealing with this issue for a long time. The Republicans have been trying to get rid of the ACA for 15 years now, right? They always say they have a plan. Where is the plan?
Right.
Where is the plan, Michael?
There is no plan.
There is no
I asked
plan.
that question back in 2010.
And so they said just last week, we're not going to vote on a clean extension of these subsidies because we've got a plan. Give us a few days. Where's the plan? Here we are once again. And, you know, I never thought I'd say this in a million years that I agree with Mike Lawler. It's bullshit, right? Here we are right now. Millions of Americans received their notices already. And many of them had to make a decision yesterday because yesterday was the deadline for enrollment in the ACA. Many of them had to make a decision to actually forego their insurance because of the double and triple digit increases that they're seeing in their health premiums for next year. And as a result, the AMA, the American Medical Association, has said that as a result of millions of people foregoing their insurance, tens of thousands of people are going to die in this country. That's not hyperbole. That's not a made-up fact. People are literally going to die because Mike Johnson didn't have the courage to actually come up with a plan to actually solve this healthcare crisis we have in this country, right? The simplest thing would have been to extend those subsidies out for another year, 2, 3 years, to actually allow us time in the Congress, clearly, to debate this out. And Mike Johnson, Speaker Johnson, decided not to do this. And I say this not lightly, but the blood is on his hands. When people die next year as a result of foregoing insurance because they were priced out of the market, Speaker Johnson is the one to blame.
I want to take a look at this map, and it shows where ACA has grown the most between 2020 and 2025. We're talking about Texas, Mississippi, West Virginia, Louisiana, Georgia, Tennessee. Given that health care has been fertile ground for Democrats since the passage of the ACA, does this map change the way that you think about your map?
You know, we've been saying this for some time, right? If you look at places throughout this country that are being impacted the most by these disastrous policies that Donald Trump's pushing, it's red states. It's his voters. And many of them have swung back our way. We've seen this in the last election, right? Not just with Latino voters that were a big part of his coalition, or young voters and young men that were a big part of his coalition, but with independent voters that are now breaking 2-1 for Democrats, right? And the reality is, in many places of the country, it's in red states that we're seeing the biggest swing because people put their stock in Donald Trump, that he was going to improve their lives, he was going to make it easier for them to live by bringing down the cost of goods and helping them and their families. He's done nothing but. And as a result, there is deep, deep buyer's remorse out there. He keeps hitting an all-time low in terms of his favorability and job approval. And if that continues, we're going to have a huge election next year for Democrats.
You know, the crazy part about this is that the ACA has grown in the states that Alicia just mentioned on the map, the enrollees in the Affordable Care Act program, because those are the states that refuse to expand Medicaid. And so when the Republican governors and the Republican-led state legislatures didn't want to take the free money on the table, the people in the states,
they're going to show them.
Yeah, I'm going to show you we ain't taking this cash. So people had to get on the public exchange. Right. And now those people are going to be the ones hit hardest and first. I am struck by the fact that you all are messaging around this, talking to people around this, but you're also putting infrastructure together in real time to give Democratic candidates and campaigns a fighting chance in the upcoming midterm elections. We talk a lot about Congress, but, you know, baby, I'm focused on the states, honey. America's policy is made in the state legislatures, and there are a number of state legislative seats and secretaries of state races that will be happening in addition to some gubernatorial races next year.
Well, that's absolutely right. And as you know, and I said when I ran for this position that I was going to get the DNC out of D.C., this is exactly what I was talking about, not just focusing on building federal power at this expense of state and local power. And the reality is state and local governments are going to have to deal with this more than anyone, with people who are now kicked off the exchange, people who don't have health care. They are still going to go into hospitals and clinics, you know, when they get sick. And of course, the taxpayers in that state are going to have to pay for this this care one way or another. The reality is that this is a huge, huge issue, not just for, of course, the people impacted without health insurance. It's a huge issue for state and local governments. And as a result, it's creating opportunities for the Democratic Party. What are those opportunities? Again, in some of the reddest counties in the state or in the country, We actually flipped those counties. Many of those counties that were red went blue in this last election. Why? Because, again, those voters there are feeling forgotten. They're feeling left behind. They're feeling unseen by an administration they put their hopes in. And so we're seeing that all over the country, including in red states like Texas and Mississippi and Georgia and other red states out there. We're seeing really positive movement our way. Look, I hate to make this political, but the reality is it is. And that's my job.
J.D. Vance doesn't hate to make it political. Did you hear what J.D. Vance had to say about affordability?
Oh, what he said?
Take a listen.
Democrats say, you know, things aren't affordable. This isn't affordable. This has gotten more expensive. Drugs have gotten more expensive. Housing's gotten more expensive. And you know what? They're right, and it was because of them.
Okay. As a Republican, I have to laugh at that level of stupid. Look, the reality of it is, go back, if you want to go back to the Biden administration, Mr. Vance, let's start there and recognize what he came in the door with, what the transition was for him, and what he left with, restabilizing the economy, getting prices to start to come down, having dealt with inflation at 9% to get it down to roughly 3%. So there's that. There's historic facts and numbers. But I want to give you talk about it's not political, but it is in a lot of respects, and I know you were a little tongue-in-cheek there. You're doing the state ground game thing. You're playing in state legislatures for state legislative races, county executive races. Kudos, smart. It's probably not very popular with some in the party and inside the building. Stick to it. Trust me, I know it works when you play that state game because voters vote up, not down.
That's right. That's exactly right. But let me say on this economic piece for a second. You know, there's old saying, at least in Minnesota, that you can put a lipstick on pig, and it doesn't matter how much lipstick you put on that pig, it's still a pig. And the reality is, you got Donald Trump out there saying it's a hoax, affordability, and you got J.D. Vance trying to blame the Democrats. The reality is they own this economy. I want you to think about this. Unemployment is at a 4-year high right now. There are 710,000 fewer people in the workforce now than there were a year ago at this time, right? You've got wage growth at a 4-year low in this country. Wages are not growing at all. And the economy is sputtering along, as you know. Nearly 70% of Americans believe that Trump and Vance are mishandling the economy. That's not just Democrats. That's independents and Republicans who are saying this guy is ruining our lives, right? You got U.S. industry across the board, right? Go talk to folks in Iowa like I have recently. I mean, their economy is absolutely devastated because of these tariffs on agriculture. There are so many pieces of this administration's policies that are impacting people's lives on a daily, and then you heap upon it the disaster, which is this looming healthcare crisis in this country. Nothing is working for this administration. No matter how much they want to gaslight the American people are smarter than that, and they can see right through what they're trying to sell right now, which is a bunch of hogwash.
There is a little-known tradition in Washington whenever a new administration takes office. The new president's incoming chief of staff has dinner with all the previous chiefs of staff. Usually one of them hosts it at their house or at a restaurant or whatever it may be. And chiefs of staff from both parties attend. And they all do this so that they can offer advice to the new incoming chief of staff on how to prepare for the role. It's kind of a nice tradition through multiple different administrations of both parties. And when Trump won the election last year, his new chief of staff, Susie Wiles, reportedly attended one of those dinners too. They each went around the table, giving her tips, as they normally do, for how to do the job. And when they got to Trump's first chief of staff, Reince Priebus, he had just one piece of advice for Susie Wiles, just one. He told her, quote, "Don't talk to Whipple." If it could be any more clear than that, that is very clear. Now, Whipple, in this case, meant Chris Whipple, the veteran journalist who has profiled just about every White House chief of staff in the modern era and also wrote a best-selling book about White House chiefs of staff. I would venture to say there are a few people who know more about the job of chief of staff than Chris Whipple. But today we learned that Susie Wiles didn't listen to that advice. And by now, I'm betting you have probably heard about, maybe you've read a couple times, like I have, the jaw-dropping interview with Trump Chief of Staff Susie Wiles that was published today in Vanity Fair by Chris Whipple. Now, in many ways, that interview has given us the most insight that we've had all year into how the Trump White House operates. And it goes a long way toward explaining why this administration is as dysfunctional as it appears to be from the outside looking in. You know, what we all think we see, what we all think is going on in there. Now, for one, Susie Wiles offers surprisingly frank hot takes on a number of her colleagues. She says that Vice President J.D. Vance has been, quote, a conspiracy theorist for a decade. She calls Trump budget director Russ Vought, quote, a right-wing absolute zealot. She calls Elon Musk, quote, an avowed ketamine user who sleeps in a sleeping bag in the executive office building during the daytime. And she describes her own boss, the President of the United States, as a man with an alcoholic's personality, in part because he operates with a view that there's nothing he can't do. Nothing, zero, nothing. I mean, that kind of confirms a whole lot about how Trump views constraints or the lack thereof on his power, right? Now, after that interview published today, Susie Wiles tried to do some damage control. The whole White House did. Now, she called the story a disingenuously framed hit piece, arguing that significant context was disregarded. But notably, and here's the key part, Wiles did not deny most of what she is quoted as saying. In fact, the only part of the interview she did explicitly deny was her claim that Elon Musk microdoses ketamine, telling the New York Times, quote, that's ridiculous. I wouldn't have said it, and I wouldn't know. But then, lo and behold, everyone, Chris Whipple played a tape for the New York Times in which Susie Wiles could be heard saying exactly that. Yes, there's almost always a tape. That's the thing. Now, I should note that Emma Snow has not independently heard that recording, but I reached out to Chris Whipple today, and he told me that, quote, every word is on tape. So there is that, everyone, which also might explain why Susie Wiles hasn't tried to deny anything else she reportedly said in that interview. And look, as a sitting White House chief of staff just starting your tenure, it takes a certain kind of hubris to do 11 on-the-record interviews with a journalist like Chris Whipple, who is literally the expert on the position you hold. The fact that Wiles continued to open up to Whipple over the course of nearly a year, again, 11 interviews, suggests to me that despite a whole lot of evidence to the contrary, she actually thought she was doing a bang-up job as White House chief of staff. She maybe thought, you know what? This is good for my legacy. I'm going to do all these interviews, and it's going to tell the story of what an amazing chief of staff I was, something like that. And that level of self-assurance was likely bolstered by the view in some circles that Wiles was the adult in the room, both in the White House and on the campaign, exuding some level of competence over the unwieldy world of Trump. Now, what's clear now, after this, I cannot even describe, absolutely bananas interview, that after it was actually published, I should say, is that she really sees her job as more of kind of an observer of sorts, an enabler, someone who's constantly getting dragged by the string she was supposed to be pulling. I mean, for example, Wiles suggested she questioned whether Trump really wanted to pardon all 1,500 people convicted in connection with January 6th. But she immediately folded when Trump decided to do it anyway, on the very first day of his presidency. As Wiles explained, in every case of the ones Trump was looking at, in every case, they had already served more time than the sentencing guidelines would have suggested. So given that, I sort of got on board. She sort of got on board. Sounds to me like she was kind of steamrolled there, doesn't it? Especially because what Trump told her to justify those pardons wasn't even true. And it was a pretty easy to figure out thing that wasn't true. I mean, she could have just asked somebody, Googled it, who knows? Now, as Whipple notes, according to court records, many of the January 6 rioters pardoned by Trump had received sentences that were lighter than the guidelines. And of course, they included those who had assaulted police officers and others who had been convicted of seditious conspiracy. But Susie Wiles apparently just shrugged her shoulders and never bothered to check the facts as she continued to use the same justification months later. Now, another example involved Elon Musk's decision to abruptly cut the world off from the life-saving foreign aid by dismantling USAID. And as Wiles explained to Whipple, quote, when Elon said, we're doing this, he was already into it, probably because he knew it would be horrifying to others. Wiles then went on to tell Whipple that it was not the way I would do it, okay? And she even admitted that Trump himself was clueless to what was going on, saying, quote, the president doesn't know and never will. He doesn't know the details of these smallish agencies. But here's the thing. It was her job to make sure he did know. That is literally her job. It was her job to explain to the president that his billionaire BFF was making decisions that would cost thousands of innocent people their lives. Instead, she just decided, I guess, to roll with it. And then there's Donald Trump's campaign of retribution against his perceived enemies. At first, Wiles told Whipple that she and Trump had, quote, a loose agreement that the score settling would end before the first 90 days are over. Well, that seems to have been a one-sided agreement because, of course, the score settling did not end in the first 90 days or at all for that matter. I mean, just consider the recent series of attempted prosecutions and investigations of people like Adam Schiff, Letitia James, James Comey. But when Whipple asked Susie Wiles about those examples, she denied they were retribution, saying, quote, in some cases, it may look like retribution, and there may be an element of that from time to time. Who would blame him? Not me. But asked specifically about Trump's prosecution of Tish James, Wiles said, well, that might be the one retribution, which is, I mean, it's just an incredible thing to admit, as well as a huge gift to Tish James's defense attorneys. Throughout the interview, Wiles repeatedly admits to having concerns about Trump's actions, on Trump's cruel immigration policies, on his disastrous tariff policies, on his attempts to start a land war in Venezuela. But Wiles appears to have just stood by and let it all happen. She's there to enable, after all. That's her job. Not to guide, not to push him on his worst impulses. Vice President J.D. Vance is quoted in the profile saying that Wiles doesn't try to control or influence or manipulate the president. He says, quote, she's a facilitator, and her job is to actually facilitate his vision and to make his vision come to life. Look, I've worked with 5 chiefs of staff in 2 different administrations. Outside the first family, the chief of staff is the single closest person to the president. They get more face time with the president than anyone else on the White House staff or the cabinet, and they often get the last word on any issue that crosses the president's desk. Their value is in their ability to deliver the hard truths the presidents don't often want to hear, and to deliver hard truths that senior members of the staff may not want to hear too. And that's why the chief of staff is such a crucial role, even when the president isn't a volatile sociopath with the attention span of a goldfish, even then. And don't just take it from me. The late Donald Rumsfeld, who served as chief of staff to President Gerald Ford, once told Chris Whipple, quote, the White House chief of staff is the one person besides his wife who can look him right in the eye and say, this is not right. You simply can't go down that road. But Donald Trump has made it clear that he will cast aside anyone who tries to assume that role. Rather than be a gatekeeper, Susie Wiles has given up on constraining any of Trump's worst impulses, which might explain why Trump and his cabinet have decided to rally around Wiles today. In fact, in an interview with the New York Post today, Trump did not dispute Wiles' characterization that he has an alcoholic's personality, adding that he has a possessive and addictive type personality. Okay. Likewise, J.D. Vance told reporters today that actually he is a conspiracy theorist, before noting that he believes his theories are true, something that every other conspiracy theorist also says and believes. Maybe, at least as of tonight, Trump doesn't want to cast Susie Wiles aside, at least for now. But that doesn't mean he can't see how bad all of this looks for him and his administration. I mean, just hours after this story dropped, Trump suddenly announced he would give a primetime address to the nation about all of his so-called accomplishments, and then posted an unhinged screed that all but amounts to a declaration of war with the nation of Venezuela. He's trying to get us all to move on from the story about his chaotic presidency that his White House chief of staff speaks about on the record by throwing a little more chaos into the mix. And in all likelihood, will only get worse. Because Friday is deadline day for the release of the Epstein files. Millions of Americans are about to see their health care prices skyrocket. He will do or say anything to keep those stories out of the headlines. And the one person whose job it is to keep him on track has just admitted in black and white that she's simply along for the ride. So there's that.